Interpretation of verse 282 of Surah Al-Baqarah. The verse begins by calling on believers to fulfill their obligations. God commands believers, if they owe a debt due for a specific period, to write it down. This command comes from God to relieve hardship, guarantee rights, and document them. Let us give an example to clarify our understanding. Of the verse, Muhammad borrowed £1,000. From Mahmud, the legal ruling here is that God commands them to write down the debt owed by the person for a specific period. Because this is a command from God, there is nothing wrong with writing it down. You will not find anyone who says, "We are companions," and does not write it down for fear of harming someone. If writing down the debt is not harmful, given the harm it may cause to the heirs, then implementing God's command removes that harm. The writer is neither the debtor nor the creditor. He is another person, and he cannot refrain from writing it down. This is a command from God Almighty. It must be written down exactly as the creditor dictates, without omitting any detail, and it must be fair to serve as evidence. One must fear God in what he dictates. If the creditor is ignorant, weak, or unable to dictate, let his guardian dictate to him fairly. Take 2 men from among your men as witnesses. If there are no men, then the testimony of 1 man and 2 women whose testimony you trust. If one of them forgets, the other can remind her. No one may refuse to testify. Every detail, great or small, must be carefully recorded. All of it must be memoized and recorded fairly. This is better for you than arousing doubt. The creditor may not harm the scribe or the witness, for that is a sin. It will harm you. Fear God, for God knows you and protects you, and He sees you. Interpretation of verse 283 of Surah Al-Baqarah. God Almighty has not overlooked the issue of debt, even when traveling. The verse explains that when traveling, if someone is forced to borrow and there is no scribe or witness, God stipulates that he leave some of his property as collateral. This means that the debtor guarantees the creditor's debt. Writing down debts and witnessing them while residing, and making a covenant while traveling, are all measures intended to protect people from social pressure. However, if they are entrusted with their trusts, there may be no covenant between them. Nevertheless, God Almighty reminds them that they are trustees of one another, because one is entrusted with the covenant they hold, and the other is entrusted with the debt. Therefore, God Almighty commands each trustee to fulfill their trust to the other, to fear God in this matter, and not to conceal it. When asked about their testimony, if they conceal their testimony, concealing their testimony is a sin of the heart, and God Almighty informs them that He is all-knowing of what they do. Verse 284 of Surah Al-Baqarah. To Allah belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth. Whether you show what is within yourselves or conceal it, Allah will bring you to account for it. Then He will forgive whom He wills and punish whom He wills, and Allah is over all things competent. Interpretation of verse 284 of Surah Al-Baqarah. The verse begins with the name of God, to God, meaning limitation and restriction. Everything in existence is in God's hand, and no one owns anything, everything is perishable. Even man, whom God made a vicegerent and made the earth a place of residence and dominion, had only his time remaining on this earth. I will give an example to clarify. Before we give an example, we must know that examples in this world are given to us through tangible things to illustrate the unseen. Any example is understood to be incomparable. We do not compare God to anything in this world. Let us take the example of an employee who has worked for a company for 20 years. The company entrusts him with its collateral, sometimes a car, sometimes an apartment near his workplace, or equipment. After his specified term with the company expires, he must hand over this collateral to his successor, and he must hand it over as it was before, without any loss. This applies to anyone who owns real estate, land, or other property. In this world, we fulfill our mission, which is to please God and His messenger. Then we hand over the trust. We must surrender it without causing destruction or sin, because we will be held accountable for our humanity and actions. God Almighty is the owner of the heavens and the earth. If people feel they have purchased this land or these properties, they can live freely in this world. God has set guidelines and a methodology that must be followed. If a person chooses God's path, follows His commands, and avoids His prohibitions, and dies at the end of his life and meets God, he will own nothing but his deeds. It is as if this wealth is a temporary trust from God, entrusted to an individual or company. This trust continues until it reaches its origin and is handed over to its creator. Will a person dispose of his wealth in a manner that pleases God or not? We are on God's earth, and He knows the treachery of the eyes and what the hearts conceal. Therefore, God Almighty warns us to be aware of our actions. He knows what we reveal and what we conceal within ourselves, and He will hold us accountable for them. He is able to forgive whomever He wills and punish whomever He wills.